Welcome to the Just Word Podcast. I'm Pat Bolland. The Just Word Podcast is brought to you by Justwealth, investing the way it should be, just for you. Welcome to the Just Word Podcast. You know, it's interesting because of an earlier podcast, everybody now has a will. We know that. But do you have a plan, an estate plan in particular, and how to put it all into place using your executors? Well, David Edey joins us. He's an author, a podcaster, and a certified executor advisor, and he joins us next. David, a real pleasure to meet you.
Pat, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know you've been in the business for more than 3 decades in terms of advising people about executing a will for as much as anything else. But, you know, how many people actually have an estate plan? How many people actually need one?
Well, in your opening, you were saying that, you know, just about everybody has a will. You think you did, but that's
not if they listen to this podcast, because we did one a few weeks ago.
Exactly. Not to correct you, but actually, you would think it would be a no-brainer that people should have a will. But statistically, it's shown that close to 60% of Canadians don't have an estate or a will plan. And what's also been shown is that men are more likely to have a will than women do. And I thought when I had wrote my book, Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor and Avoid Family Fights, I thought that it would be women that would be more interested, in the book. And, based on the metrics at my website, it's mostly men. And I get the subject that we're talking about when we're talking about will and end of life planning. It's not a sexy topic. People usually will avoid the topic. They procrastinate, or they take the view, I'm going to be dead, it's not my problem. Well, spoiler alert, it's going to happen to all of us. And we need to plan and have conversations. And I'll be saying this a lot during our conversation, that conversations have to take place. My book came about because it took me 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 in lawyers' fees to settle my parents' estate, and they had a will. And the more I would talk about it to clients, being in the financial planning industry for over 35 years, I'd hear from executors who were having problems, and I'd also hear from families that were broken up because of not having conversations and this particular issue. So I didn't want anybody else to go through what I went through, so I wrote the book.
It's often been said that the road to trouble is paved with good intentions. How often are there disputes in terms of the execution of a will?
Far more than it happens a lot. When I was doing the research for the book, I talked to some mediators, and before, you would have problems with kids fighting over the estate when parents had passed away. But what's now far more common is that people are fighting while the parents are still alive, and all of that could be taken away if there are conversations. In my case, when my parents, were 3 kids, and I would think that, everything was going to be split 3 ways, and it was in the will. My parents had the will done in my office. One of the mistakes is, even though I would sit with clients while they were with the lawyer and have it done in my office, I wasn't in the room when my parents had their will done. I just couldn't fathom, again, because of the topic, talking about their death. My other sister was, a third sister wasn't there, but, when it should have been split 3 ways, apparently equal was not fair, and hence we had to end up going to court. And that, if anything, as much as I miss my parents' voices every day, they didn't have the conversations with us to explain what their wishes were and how to keep the family together. My book's based on preparing the executor for the responsibility, and it's also for the individual who is planning their estate and wants to make sure that they leave a legacy and not a legacy in a mess.
I understand that. Okay, so walk me through the process. How do you start by picking your trustees or in some cases, I guess, guardians?
The Well, it's two different things. So if you're going to pick somebody to be your executor, you're going to, because you're asking them to do probably the biggest favor in their lives, because taking on the responsibility of an executor is very difficult and it's time consuming. On average, it takes anywhere from 100 hours and between 18 to 24 months. And because of the pandemic, it probably could take longer. And you're asking them to do a myriad of things to, shut down, social media, deal with accountants, lawyers, all of those things. You're asking them to do all those things. And 99% of the time, people are not trained for this particular job. And on top of that, you've also got beneficiaries who are, they look at their inheritance is something that is owed to them, and they're not going to understand the process you have to go through as an executor. So you have to think long and hard, who are you asking? You're also going to have to prepare them because for the responsibility and make it as easy for them. So, part of what I talk about in the book, you need to make sure that they know where all of the information is kept, such as the will. A new part is digital assets. We spend a lot of time online, and just one email address is going to have probably 130 different digital entries in terms of Netflix, Facebook. So it's all going to be connected to that. So if someone doesn't know where all of those digital assets are, which is a whole new area that's come into the estate planning area, if they don't know where those assets are, you've also made the job harder for your executor. So you're setting them up for failure if you don't prepare them properly. And again, we're coming back to leave a legacy or a legacy in a mess.
Well, and I do want to talk about digital assets, but let's do that later on, because
Okay.
I want to talk about a really plain estate, if you will, money. How often is money split evenly and fairly, in your opinion? Just money. We're not talking about houses or real estate or cottages or farms, just money.
Well, all of those things you just mentioned, money, you really don't know about somebody until you have to share an inheritance with them. Believe me, I know. So you're going to see people who you thought you knew change overnight, because the way it's set up now is that people, when you're leaving money to someone, you think you're leaving them a legacy, and you're passing it on. They look at it a different way. They're looking at it as money coming to them. And it's, for some people, this could be, I look at it as, their lottery ticket, that this is going to set their, whatever mistakes they might have made financially or whatever they think they're entitled to, is coming now, and they want it as fast as possible. They're not interested in about, the tax situation. They're not interested about what has to be, what's going to be sold. All they're looking at is, when do I get my money? And I have a friend of mine who's in the legacy planning area, and she calls it the curse of inheritance. And it's an evil thing, that it's a monster that eats up families because of that sense of entitlement, and which is what I went through over 7 years.
It's interesting. I had an associate that put a clause, I guess, in their will that said none of this would take place for 3 years, because they had to establish things that you talked about, for instance, taxation of the estate and money that was coming in from different sources, those kinds of things. Is that a good strategy, do you think?
Absolutely. Anywhere where you can make it easier on the executor to understand what's involved. So I talk about in the book, your executors, the minimum should have access to a lawyer, an accountant, and a financial advisor. But they're probably going to need, a lot of times, it's up to 17 different professionals that they're going to have to deal with. There's real estate agents, there's going to be auctioneers for the estate. There's so many people that you probably could, as an executor, you're going to be faced with, that your bare minimum you should have is that accountant, the lawyer, and the financial advisor. And again, you're setting up the executor so that you're making the job a lot easier on them, because a lot of people aren't trained for this. A lot of people don't have an administrative mind. A lot of people don't have the financial mind. A lot of people don't know where to go to get started. And on top of that, the person's also dealing with the grief, the loss of this person that they're doing this favor for. So it's a lot of things, and a lot of times it's family members that are asked to be executors, and they're dealing with a lot of things. It's life altering. When I lost my parents, both to cancer, they're gone within a year of each other, and I can tell you it's changed the direction and the outlook of our family going forward. The three of us have not spent a holiday together since my mother passed away in 2010 because of this estate problem. Well, not
Wow,
problem.
that's such a shame. As you well know, estates aren't always just about money. They often deal with property and sentimental property. I'm thinking cottages, for instance, and they can't be shared. Well, often or typically can't be shared equally. Is it better to liquidate the cottage, get the cash, and then split that equally?
Again, it's the money. When it comes to cottages, I'll say this, and I talk about it in the book, probably the biggest dangers and problems that cause stress for everybody is you don't know what the wishes are of the testator, the person who wrote the will. You don't know what the tax situation is going to be. So you need to have it accounted because that's going to have an effect on everything. You don't know how to manage the property until a decision is made. In the book, I got a friend of mine, Cam, he went through this, and he came to find out, even though they had this cottage, his mom and dad didn't have a will. The two of the brothers decided that they were going to be the executor, and they ended up selling the cottage under the other children. And on top of that, they charged their siblings an executor fee. Never told them what it was. So he had to end up going to court with them as well, spending over $50,000 in lawyers' fees. And that's because of just that one area of the cottage. And if the parents had had a will, or if the parents had had a cottage conversation and said what they wanted to do, everybody would understand what needs to take place. And everyone, what will happen is, like you said, maybe you're going to sell it, but what will be the tax implications? Then there could be, for sentimental reasons, say there's three kids, two of them use the cottage, the other one doesn't, but they want their money. They don't go up to the cottage, they live too far or whatever it might be. It doesn't have the same sentimental value. So now the two other siblings have to figure out a way, how do we buy them out? And then so you have to go through the whole process of getting it evaluated, and then suppose you can't afford it. Yes, it's a sentimental value, then you're going to have to sell it, which again might be difficult on the family who's left behind, but that all could be alleviated if the testator, person who wrote the will, makes it clear, has the conversations to their beneficiaries what their wishes are going to be.
It's important, I think, in many circumstances to look at a will as you point out, a legacy, as opposed to an entitlement. I'm entitled to the cottage, I'm entitled to the cash, I'm entitled to this, that, and the other thing. How many people take that approach?
In terms of they feel they're entitled?
Yeah, or vice versa, don't feel they're entitled, and they're willing to accept their will and their estate, their portion of the estate, as a gift, which it really is. It's a gift from one generation to the next.
Absolutely. But it comes down to, you got to back it up even further to, like, if it gets to this point where someone has passed away and there's an estate to distribute, you've got to back it up and think about, well, what kind of family is this? There's three types of families. There's the family who buries their head in the sand and they don't talk about possible death. They don't want to talk about it because we get together at Christmas or the holidays and we have a good time. Then there is the family that does have the will, but they don't have a conversation and say what's in it. So there's a lot of surprises, and they leave the will to do the talking for them when they're gone, which could lead to problems of what happens to the cottage, etc. So there needs to be a conversation. And then the third type of family who plans for this legacy, this intergenerational transfer of wealth. And they say, you know what, someday I'm not going to be here, but I want the cottage to go to the kids. I wanted to stay in the family. There's dollars. I wanted to pass it on to the next generation and the next unborn generation. So there's some sort of plan the family gets together. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, my family is perfect. Look, every family's got issues. Believe me, I know. So, but every family also starts out with the area from the starting point of perfection. But we all know they all got issues. And you have no idea how people are going to react when you're no longer there. So if you plan and get them organized and you're thinking about the next generations, whatever the problems they might have today and jealousy and fighting, that's infighting that goes on right now, you probably can try and quash it and put it out while you're still here and make it easier on them going forward. But again, the important thing is to have the conversations, and a lot of families don't want to have those conversations. I know my mom and dad didn't have the conversations.
Okay, let's change tact a little bit. Can you cut somebody out of a will entirely if they're part of the family, or does that always end up in court?
Yes, I mean, it's your estate. You can do anything you want. But then again, if you're going to cut them out, then you need to have a conversation and let them know why you cut them out. They may or may not like it. Again, it's a sense of entitlement. If you think I need to be in there, you don't deserve anything. It's your legacy. You can do anything you want with it. But I think to make it be less messy, again, we're coming back to leave a legacy or a mess. It's best to say, well, I've cut you out and here's the reason why to do it, why I did it. You're going to have those conversations. Now, when I say have those conversations, and it's going to be a family conversation, I don't suggest doing it at a Christmas dinner. By the way, I've cut you out of my will. Can you pass the rolls and keep going? No, find a time where you're going to have that family meeting and explain to them why you've cut them out. It comes down to conversations. Again, it's not a sexy topic. People are uncomfortable with it. I get it, but you need to have those conversations. Get it over with. It's uncomfortable, but you got to get it over with. So to answer your question, yes, you could do it, but you're also going to have to explain why you're doing it.
I think that'd make a great movie, that whole dinner roll conversation, you're cut out of the will. You mentioned it earlier, digital assets, and they seem to be a growing true asset. How do you suggest people and the executors handle digital assets?
Well, first you need to, you have to, because and I go through this in the book, every social media company has their own sort of terms and conditions of how to shut down an account. So, Facebook has, and Twitter and Instagram. So you need to understand what you need to do to shut those down. I have a friend of mine, a buddy of his passed away 3 years ago, but the Facebook account is still saying it's his birthday, and there's still posts coming from it. So clearly, it's the executor either the executor knows it's there and doesn't know how to shut it down, or they haven't got the passwords to shut it down. Because there's a couple of ways that you can shut down a Facebook account. So I suggest, there's a lot of solutions. You could, just put it on a spreadsheet, or you could write it out, all your passwords, or there's a lot of digital online solutions where it could be kept in the cloud. And all you would have to do is just, make that part of your bright red folder that your executor knows, or the people that need to know in case of an emergency. It's important to have that and make it easier for them to find, whether you use the bright red folder or use an online solution, is that when people are traumatized, they can't find things and they're just going to be scurrying around. They don't know where to look. But if you told your executor, if something was to happen, look for this bright red folder, or here's the login information that you're going to need, and all my information is going to be there to make it easier on you. If you can do that, prepare your family, prepare your executor. Again, you're making it easier on them, especially because they're already grieving for the loss of you. So why not give them the biggest gift of love that you can and have everything's organized?
Yeah. Is there a risk to that? And I'm thinking, so for instance, let's say I left a spreadsheet of my passwords, and one of them was my banking password, and the executor went into my bank account and started to transact. Is the executor liable? Is the bank liable? Am I, even though I've passed, am I liable?
Well, the executor, when you take on that responsibility, you are legally going to be held responsible. So any mistakes, any I was going to say finagling, any things that you think you can do, you could be held responsible. You could be held criminally responsible. So even though they have the passwords, once the banks know that you have passed away, then an estate account has to be set up. So the banks are going to freeze all the accounts. So say there, and in one way, I would suggest before you let the bank know as an executor that the person has passed away, you might take out some dollars to make sure the funeral is taken care of. There's no, because it's going to take a while. You're going to need some dollars, and then let the bank know, and then set up the estate account. I mean, the executor is responsible for everything, and you can be held liable if there's any misappropriation of funds. And a lot of times that's why beneficiaries, if they think things are going slow, that they want to take and it's not uncommon that beneficiaries are going to sue an executor.
Okay, so suppose I'm an executor and I have no idea what I'm doing with any kind of an estate. I don't care whose it is. Can I go? Where can I go for help?
Well, first you would get my book. Okay, that's the first step. Make it a lot easier. You see, I've already saved you a lot of time right there. So again, the minimum amount of professionals you're going to need is an accountant to help you with the taxes, the tax situation. Also, maybe hopefully they'll be willing to explain to the beneficiaries if there's some stuff you can explain. Let them, hope the accountant be able to answer those questions. Have the lawyer and also a financial advisor to make sure the assets are transferred, or maybe they need to be managed until it's time to be distributed. I talk about the 3 goals in the book of what an executor needs to know in terms of make sure you file the right tax return, make sure that you pay the beneficiaries, and make sure that you get the clearance certificate from Revenue Canada or CRA that the estate is all settled, and you move on from there. I suggest you don't pay out anybody anything, as much as they might be saying, where's my money, until you make sure that the tax planning and all the tax issues are going to be taken care of, and you make sure that there's enough money to pay the taxes first before you distribute any money. Because what could happen is you might distribute money, the accountant hands you the tax bill, and you haven't got enough money. Try and collect that money back after you've scratched them a check for $80,000 or $90,000. You think they're gonna, no, that's not gonna happen. So you make sure that those things are taken care of first, and then you distribute. The one thing I would suggest if you're going to be the executor is that if you want to stay out of trouble, is to stay constant communication with the executors. Maybe it's an email every 1 or 2 weeks. Hey, this is what I'm doing. Maybe it's a Zoom call once a month, and you get everyone and let everybody know what's going on. What you need to do is make sure that you have constant contact with them, because if there's radio silence on your behalf as the executor, now they're going to start to look at you sideways. Like, why is this taking so long? What's he doing? What is he up to? What, do I need to send Pat a lawyer's letter? Why is he not phoning me back? You know that you're doing everything and there's a lot of things to be done. During those 100 hours, you can't do just on the weekends. There's a lot of times you might have to take time off from work to get these things done. So they don't know what you're doing to get the job done, to get them their money. So you just need to keep them apprised of what you're doing and keep it going there, and keep a good line of communication. Despite maybe you might not like some of the beneficiaries, put that aside, because it's not about you.
Yeah, that's not your job. From beginning to end, David, what you said is communicate. Before you die, communicate your wishes. After you die, the executor has to communicate. That's a great message to have. Is your book available online?
Absolutely. You can go to my website, davidedey.com. It's available at all fine online retailers. It's available at Indigo. And I just want to say that my book is I know you've done a show on wills, but my book is about why you need to do this. And the why and having a will is the how. So you need to do those things because intensive care is no place to find out that your mom or dad or someone you love doesn't have a will, because I know you can't have a meaningful conversation when somebody's on a respirator. So you need to make sure that you prepare your executor, and you also prepare your estate so that you, again, I say, leave a legacy, not a mess.
David, great chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Edey. He's a author, podcaster, certified executor advisor, and obviously go to his website. Thanks for joining us.